Hey everyone, I wanted to go over the new and extremely exciting news that we have for both Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak on the Nintendo Switch and on PC. And that's the fact that after the second free title update, of course, once again, people will begin to look into the game's files and begin to discover some interesting things. And today in this video, we're gonna be going over essentially the 8 new monsters that are set to become free title update additions to Sunbreak already. I do want to make this clarification very clear at the top of this video. Of course, as every single time that I talk about these type of things, the data is currently incomplete. Do not sit here and act like this is a full complete list. Things will be added. Some things could actually end up being wrong. Some things just simply aren't set in stone. That's the nature of these type of, let's say, when people look into the game's files, we just don't necessarily have all the details as of yet. We also don't necessarily know when they're actually set to drop. We do know of at the very least 2 more free title updates that have been confirmed by Capcom. The one happening in November, which I'm actually presuming is going to happen on November 30th. The one that is going to be happening in early 2023. And we also know of one at the very least sometime later in 2023 based off of a developer interview, but they have not necessarily confirmed that as of yet. So when do these monsters drop? Presumably at the start of November, heading into the future. I'm also going to be putting a link in the description below for the original people who actually made some of these discoveries. Some of them were a Chinese user by the name of Whitecat. Another one's a Korea user as well. So links in the description below. I wanted to take my time to actually go ahead and confirm some of this. Make sure that I actually had all the complete data before I actually started to talk about it, because the last thing that I want to do is put incomplete data and provide false hope for those who actually see a monster, this is their fan favorite monster, and then all of a sudden, oh, it actually turns out that was completely incorrect. I don't want to do that. Also, for a quick heads up, a few days ago, I put out a video going over the 8 brand new event quests that we are going to get from free title update number 2, heading into free title update number 3 as well. So make sure to check that out. There's going to be a link in the description below. So with all the table setting out of the way, the first thing that I want to show you guys is the monster's internal creation date table. This is essentially what is giving us the idea of the understanding as to what monsters are going to be added into the game relatively to their position to this table. So later in this video, when I'm talking about, well, there's a monster that's going to be added, a placeholder spot for a monster appearing in such spot before this and that monster. Therefore, I'm referencing this specific chart right here. So you should be able to see that this pretty much covers every single monster that's ever been in Monster Hunter. And essentially, when I'm talking about a placeholder monster appearing in between 2 monsters, we're talking about specifically this chart right here. So at base value, what we're looking at here is the addition of 8 brand new monsters. 4 of them that are supposed to be risen monsters. These would be the ones that were just recently introduced in free title update number 2. As brand new elder monsters that have kind of overcome the Curio's powers and basically become their very own thing. There's 2 other monsters that are like essentially placeholders, monsters that we kind of already expected to be added in, but we didn't necessarily know. And the other 2 are essentially kind of like toss-ups. It could be either or both. We don't necessarily know. So it could be a potentially of 8 new monsters. It could actually be potentially up to 10. We're not too sure. That's why we keep saying this data is incomplete, but for the most part, we have a pretty good idea. So starting out essentially with the 4 brand new risen monsters, first and foremost, we know that Risen Teostra is pretty much appearing in the files based off of essentially a brand new placeholder spot after EM027. This would be base Teostra, so presumably a brand new Risen Teostra is one of the brand new additions we can expect. Also in the same vein, Risen Kushala Daora, essentially we know that because there's a spot, a placeholder right after EM024 where base Kushala Daora appears. These 2 shouldn't come too much of a surprise since they're basically just like Chameleos, base Elder Dragons, which kind of based on the free title of the number 2 data that they provided us with, the lore information, they kept reiterating that like more Elder Dragons are coming in that format. So that's not much of a surprise. What is a surprise is the introduction of Risen Shagaru Magala. This one appears directly after EM072 in the aforementioned chart. So we know that base Shagaru Magala is already in the game. Presumably another version of Shagaru Magala is being added in. And if you add it all together, unless they actually do a brand new version of Shagaru Magala, some sort of different thing, this one is most likely going to be a risen Shagaru Magala. Now, another one that we didn't necessarily expect, and the first one out of the monsters that can have a little bit of a controversy based on not necessarily having the full data, is the fact that a risen Valstrax is going to be added in. Now, I need to make this very clear. As of right now, it just seems to suggest that it's just risen Valstrax, as in the normal Valstrax, not Crimson Glow Valstrax. This is why we say we're not necessarily too sure. That is because the number appears after EM086_05 Crimson Glow Valstrax. So presumably it could be risen Crimson Glow Valstrax, but it can also be risen base Valstrax. Remember that the base version of Valstrax does not appear in the game at all. So right now it could be either or. We don't necessarily know. A lot of people would argue either one, but base Valstrax is certainly a popular monster. If they decide to make that one risen, whatever the case may be, that thing as a risen monster is going to be a menace. So people need to get ready, because that thing is going to be nasty. So as far as we're concerned, those are the only 4 risen monsters that we have details of for now. We don't have any more details regarding any other risen monsters as of right now. Now, heading out of that, we know that there's also a placeholder for Chaotic Gore Magala. That's because it's basically there's a brand new placeholder after EM071 in the aforementioned chart. And if you have been following my channel and kind of been following the way that I kind of cover these things, I've talked about multiple times how Chaotic Gore Magala was always going to be part of free title update number 3. If I had to put any money down on the placement of any of these monsters, when they're going to drop, which free title update they're going to be part of, or anything like that, I'm not necessarily a betting man, but if I had to put money down, I would put money on Chaotic Gore Magala from the very get-go to be part of free title update number 3. So this one is going to be one that we're going to see relatively very soon. So do stick around for that, because we're going to be seeing this one soon. Now, another one that's going to be another one of a question mark, I guess, to some degree, is that there's basically a brand new placeholder spot directly after EM132. This would suggest a brand new Malzeno type of monster, essentially. So either a Malzeno subspecies, a Malzeno rare species, but what I'm actually thinking of being a Malzeno variant. Remember, this is not going to be a risen Malzeno. It actually wouldn't necessarily make sense lore-wise, since Malzeno kind of is already a risen monster to begin with. That was one of the ongoing memes when we actually got to see a risen Chameleos, that he essentially took Malzeno's power, if you will, and he basically made it his own. That was kind of like the ongoing meme. So essentially a brand new Malzeno variant. It would be expected, something that we can expect specifically in this spot. The reason why I specifically say variant is that don't necessarily forget that Magnamalo got the same treatment. Magnamalo essentially got a normal version, the flagship version of Rise, and then now we got, I believe, Scorn of Magnamalo is the name of it, Pirate Magnamalo, if you will, and he's essentially a variant. So Malzeno getting the same treatment wouldn't necessarily be too much of a stretch, but that is what we're looking at right now. So far that is 6 monsters, and these are pretty much the staples that we can expect. These are pretty much guarantees in one way, shape, or another. The next 2, however, or the next 4 potentially, could end up being a little bit tricky, since it turns out to be an either or type of situation based on the aforementioned chart. Essentially, another placeholder for a variant Sunogre appears. What we're looking at here is a spot after EM057_07. That would be Apex Sunogre. So right before EM059, Great Ragi. So hypothetically speaking, Sunogre is a rare species, which would be EM05702. But then it brings up the question that if this is kind of like a sorted monster between Apex Sunogre and regular Sunogre, so we don't necessarily know. A lot of people have suggested it could be like a flying Sunogre if they actually give it the power of the Curio. It is suggested that it's going to be some sort of flying creature of one way or another. The next monster we're going to talk about in a bit is actually suggesting that 100%. So we're not necessarily too sure if it's going to be a variant Sunogre, a rare Sunogre, a new type of Sunogre. Not necessarily sure. The reason for that is that because there's also a placeholder spot or Amatsu's new version, or a new variant, or a new type of Amatsu, or just base Amatsu, that would be EM058. So what we're looking at here is a spot between Apex Sonogre and Great Ragi. So it could be a variant Sonogre, or it could be Amatsu. That is the either or type of situation that we're dealing with. As of right now, and do remember that later this month, we should be able to get a patch, kind of like updating some things regarding some of the glitches that they couldn't necessarily get to on the second free title update. So therefore, maybe this data actually clears up a little bit and we have a better understanding as to what it could end up being, either a variant Sonogre or Amatsu. Personally, if I had to put money on it, I think it would be Amatsu, because it would make perfect sense to be the last monster appearing on the patch, as he has direct connection to both Ibushi and Narwa, being one of those flying creatures. Also remember that lore-wise, or like, I guess not lore-wise, but like suggestion-wise, Amatsu is something that was kind of already teased. There's specifically a point in the story in Sunbreak where the wind stops in Elgato and the clouds take over the skies, leading to a specific mission that is highly suggested that the mountain right in front of Elgato could be the arena housing the original Amatsu at the peak. So of course, that's kind of suggested, is gonna be thrown around out there from people. So that could be one of those things we don't necessarily know. This is why I said at the top of the video, I don't want to give out false hope. It could be a variant Sonogre that's just a normal Sonogre, or maybe even a powered up Sonogre, or it could be Amatsu. Either or, we'll have to wait and see. Now, the next two monsters become a little bit even more questionable based on their placement. So essentially what we have here is that after a brand new placeholder spot appears after EM118_05, that would be Seething Bazelgeuse, and right before EM131. This is pretty much where all the Sunbreak monsters will begin. So this could mean basically something like CZ Yaku. I believe that's a little lizard thing from Iceborne, but of course we wouldn't necessarily expect that, since we're expecting actually powerful monsters to be making their way as free title update monsters. So it could basically be a lot of monsters from Iceborne, but a lot of people have suggested specifically Volcana or Namiel as basically placeholders for something appearing in this specific slot. This one is more vague than the aforementioned one between some sort of Sonogre or Amatsu, because the gap of monsters that could appear here is rather big, so we don't necessarily know either or. It could be anything Iceborne related. That would be a brand new monster that appeared in Iceborne, specifically between those two placeholders, or simply put, Volcana is being added in as like kind of like the closing monster of Sunbreak, or it could be even Namiel. I know Namiel is a rather popular monster. I don't necessarily see that one happening because of like the entire engagement of it. Volcana, to me, it makes a little bit more sense, but also that's a flagship for another game. So unless they decide to bring it over, we'll just have to wait and see. So this is why I said this one specifically is more vague than the other one. We don't necessarily know. But all in all, that is essentially all the 8 monsters that we can easily expect. Risen Teostra, Risen Kushala Daora, Risen Shagaru Magala, Risen Valstrax, Chaotic Gore Magala, a placeholder for presumably a variant brand new Malzeno, either a variant for Sonogre or Amatsu, and of course, a brand new addition of its Iceborne monster. It could be Namiel, it could be Volcana, or it could be anything along those lines that was a brand new monster in Iceborne, even Sitsi Yaku, whatever that weird little lizard thing was. So that is what we're looking at. Now, the last thing that I do want to close out this video, and it's already been a long video, so I apologize for that, but I wanted to be very specific about all of this, is the release date placement. I think it would be not necessarily too much of a surprise, like I mentioned at the top of the video, that Chaotic Gore Magala would be part of free title number 3. That's something that we have been expecting for quite a while. Also, Risen Kushala Daora or Risen Teostra could easily be one of the monsters also being added in the next free title update, with the surprise of something else being added in, one of the aforementioned monsters. Of course, I also think that if they're going to add either Volcana or Amatsu, those would be monsters that we essentially get at the very end. Those would be like the last free title update that we end up seeing. Some people have suggested that based off of 8 monsters, with the understanding that this data is incomplete and more monsters could be added, we can potentially be looking at 6 free title updates. I don't subscribe to that theory as of right now. It's too early for that. I presumably subscribe, like I mentioned before, up to 5 free title updates, the 2 that we have pending and a 5th one that they have suggested to at the end of 2023. but that is just me. That doesn't necessarily mean that Capcom is going to listen to me. Ultimately, the sales dictate what is going to be happening, not necessarily my opinion. So whatever monsters and however many monsters we end up getting for the next free title updates is all going to be dictated on those things. So right now we have information on 8 monsters, but it could potentially end up being more. Do keep that in mind. I also wanted to make that very clear. But with all that said, and I apologize once again for the long video, but I certainly wanted to be as thorough as possible. And I certainly want to hear your guys' feedback on this. Let me know in the comments what monsters you're excited to hear are being added in, which ones you think should be added in, everything like that. Do let me know in the comments. I always love to read them. Certainly love to hear your feedback. If you're brand new to my channel, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Hit the bell to receive notifications when the videos go up. And as always, thank you so much for watching. See ya.